This is Dateline News and Conversation. The topic today, an American living in Far East Russia. Well, my guest today, Pete Clark. Pete, welcome back to the show.
Hello.
Well, I introduced you as an American living in Far East Russia, Yakutsk. And when I looked at the map, it looked to me like you're closer to Alaska than you are to Crimea.
It might be.
All right, so tell me a little bit about yourself. You're an American, you're born in America, educated in America, and you worked in America. Tell me a little bit about that, your educational background, and what you were doing for work.
Yeah, I was born in Peoria, Illinois, and I am a chemist by profession, and I worked in the paint industry for almost 30 years as a chemist and in different management capacities. I've had the pleasure of working and living in over 50 countries, actually.
So I have to ask you this. When did you come to Russia and why Russia?
Well, I came the first time in 2003, and I came because I had met a Yakutian woman, first online on what was a popular instant messaging program at the time, ICQ. I don't know if anybody still uses it or not, but at the time it was popular. And we had been talking for a while, and we ended up deciding we wanted to meet each other, and we first met in Cyprus. And then that went pretty well, and she invited me to come to Russia, and I went in 2003. And then I went again, and by the time that second time was done, we were married.
Okay, so that happens, I guess, more often than not. You've been married for how many years now? And I know you're a Russian citizenship. You've been here long enough to get a passport.
That's true. I just got my Russian citizenship in 2021. So it hasn't been that long that I've been a Russian citizen. But let's see. I forget the first part of your question.
No,
how long have I been here since? Well, I first came in 2003, and we got married in February of 2004, and
okay.
So I've been living here kind of since.
And because you're a Russian citizen now with a Russian passport, you voted in the most recent Russian presidential election.
I did.
So with citizenship then comes a number of benefits. You have health care. You're treated as a Russian citizen legally in all senses. And you now have the right to vote. I have to assume you consider that a privilege, yes?
Well, I think it is not just a privilege, but I think it's a responsibility. This was the first presidential election that I participated in, but it wasn't my first election. I had participated in the election to the Duma also previously.
So when you went to the voting place and you presented your Russian passport, they knew you're an American, I'm sure, or they a foreigner. Do they look at you in a strange way? You know, the Russian officials in the voting polling stations?
No, I wouldn't say they treated me well. When I went to the presidential election uh, voting spot, I picked a good time because there was nobody else there. I was like the only one there. And it was hard to judge how they treated me versus anybody else since I was the only one there. But no, I think they asked me what my street was, and they had different stations where they had books of who was registered to vote. You know, that was going to that voting station, and they sent me to the girl who was checking the people in my area, and she looked at my passport, which has where I'm registered, you know, where my registered address is, and checked that I was on her list, and I was, and she made me sign the book where my name was, and then she gave me a ballot, and I got to go in the voting booth and cast my ballot.
So you have written uh, to me and to some other colleagues about your impressions, your opinion about voting in Russia. Let me hear it.
Yep. Well, nobody pressured me to vote. First of all, it's not like somebody came by and said you must vote. I was free to vote, or I was free not to vote. Uh, so that's the first thing. There's no pressure on anybody. Of course, there's a campaign that was going on up until the point of election, and of course I saw campaign materials that had been put out, you know, posters on the street or
So that's
signage,
that's basically
usual things.
that's basically just like the United States or anywhere else.
Yeah,
There's
it's
campaigning candidates. So tell me more about this Russian election. This is very important now. It's not just an American who's living in America making positive or negative comments about it. You've been there for a number of years. You're a citizen and you voted. Um, Tell me
yep.
more about the electoral process. You know, our compatriots back in the United States are going to say that Putin's a dictator, that he had no competition, uh, and they're going to say that this election was a farce. Now, what would you say to counter that? And I know you have an opinion on this.
I absolutely have an opinion, and of course, that's why I have written a piece that our good friends at the CCI folks that published it, and I also published a similar article on the local internet newspaper here in Yakutsk. There, for Americans need to understand that it was clear that Putin was probably going to win. He is tremendously popular here in Russia. Everybody knew that. All of the polling data, even from Western polling services, were showing that Putin enjoyed 80% confidence amongst the population. So it wasn't going to be a surprise that Vladimir Putin won. But to say that there was no competition is just plain wrong. First of all, I think at the beginning of the year, there were, if I remember right, I think there were 11 candidates that had announced their intention to run. And were proceeding through the process of being qualified to be on the ballot. Now, not all of those people ended up being on the ballot. The same process happens in the United States, by the way.
They had
You
to have a
lot
number of
running.
they had to get each of them had to get a certain number of signatures, right?
There was several different criterion that they had to meet, and the most difficult one, of course, is obtaining enough registered voters' signatures and proving that that you had some number of potential voters, at least, that were willing to say that they wanted you on the ballot. So there was 11 people at the beginning of the year that were in that process, but by the end, there were Vladimir Putin and I'm trying to think 3 or 4 other candidates now.
I think it was 3.
Yeah, three other candidates. Yeah, there was,
and one of them was the Communist Party, which is the most powerful bloc, right?
Right, the Communist Party, and then the New People's Party, which is a relatively new party, but it's fairly strong, I would say. And then the third party is I'm drawing a blank on it, but it's also a very strong, I would say, a very nationalistic party. And the candidates were strong. Everybody in Russia knows them.
Yeah, they were well known. Certainly, the Communist Party, the New People's Party, they're well known. They have representation in the Duma and the upper chamber, correct?
Well, all 3 parties have representation in the Duma, and some of them have representation, as governors of different parts of Russia, that sort of thing. They have local officials as well. So,
but as you pointed out, Americans needed to understand that Putin was not the only one on the ballot. That there were three other
he was
credible,
not the only one.
Yeah, and 3 other credible challengers that represented 3 different parties. And so the next question is, well, okay, he had those challenges, but, the Russians rigged the vote. How would you respond to that?
They didn't need to rig the vote.
Well,
who needed to rig the vote?
Americans will say that, of course, it's rigged. They fudged the voting machines. They came up with boxes and boxes of fake ballots. But what can you say to that? Because you and I both know there were official observers in many, many voting locations across Russia. Official meaning from other countries. Now, was any of this voting electronic? That certainly could be tampered with. To your knowledge, how authentic was this vote in terms of it being observed by others and in the whole tabulation process?
Well, I can't really speak about the tabulation process because I wasn't an observer of how the ballots got counted. But let me say this. I got a paper ballot. And before I got my paper ballot, I had to show my Russian domestic passport, which has my picture. It has my registered address. I mean, they can look at my face and say, yeah, that's the person sitting in front of the official checking. And they look in the register and they see that, yes, I'm a registered citizen at that address. And they gave me a paper ballot that I was able to take into a voting booth that I would say was, for all practical purposes, identical to the voting booths that are used in the United States, at least back in the day when we had paper ballots and people actually went to the voting place to vote. It was the same. And I marked my ballot, and then I took my ballot, and there was a box that was made out of, I believe, clear plastic, probably plexiglass or whatever, but it was visible that you could see that the ballots were in there, and there was an observer present who made sure that I only put in one ballot into the box. And after I put my ballot in the box, I was done and I left.
Yeah. I went with a friend here in Yalta, and there were only a couple of people there. But when we got there, I asked if I could come in, and they said yes. And I sat down and I was waiting, but they wouldn't allow any pictures. I wanted to take some pictures to show American people what it really was looking like. Anyway, she did the same thing you did. They checked her domestic passport. They checked where she lived, where she was registered, signed the book, gave her the paper. She went into a booth, identical to what we have in America. Because it was only for the presidential election, voting was really quick. You could only vote for one. So she was in and out of there, and she dropped it into the box. But here in Yalta, at that voting station anyway, the ballots were being electronically read as she put it into the machine. And so I know for a fact that some of the voting places, and I'm sure it had to be in Moscow and Petersburg and larger cities, they probably did have electronic voting. But 60% of the people had already voted, and that was the day before the voting was closed. It was a Saturday, and they told us 60% in that district had already voted. And I mean, that's really impressive. In some places, there were lines and quite long, but nobody was ever held waiting for political purposes, like we know happened in the United States in the last presidential election. All right, so you're also a business person. You're in business with your wife. I know you're not exporting and importing things except guests and tourists. So tell me about the business.
Well, when you say, I'm not importing and exporting, actually, I had such a business earlier, but I don't have it now. Right now, my wife and I own and operate a bed and breakfast in Yakutsk. It's a 12-room bed and breakfast. And we've had it since 2012. And we've been quite happy with how it's been working out for us. We have a pretty high occupancy rate, have had since the day we opened, actually. We've had probably over 70% occupancy rate the whole time, except during COVID.
Yeah. Did you take it over from somebody else, or did you start this from scratch?
No, we started it from scratch. Actually, what happened was I had bought an apartment in a building that was to be constructed. So when and this is typical in Russia, if you want to buy a new apartment, usually the best time to buy it is before they've even built it. So I bought an apartment in what was to be a new construction, and I bought the entire floor of that entrance of the apartment block. Usually in Russia, apartment buildings are these huge apartment blocks with multiple entrances, and each entrance is kind of almost a separate building, if you will. But on the floor that I bought, there were actually 4 apartments, so by design. But I bought the entire floor, so my intention was to make one big apartment out of it. But then after they finished the building, I decided I wasn't really happy with having such a big apartment in that particular building. And so my wife and we decided to buy a different apartment where we're living now. And with that space, we decided to make the bed and breakfast.
So Russia's under sanctions now, so there aren't very many foreign tourists coming here. So who is your clientele?
Well, when we first opened, we had quite a few tourists, foreigners. This last year, we've only had one American come, but we did have one American that still came. Americans need to know that Russia is still open. If there's an American in the U.S. that would like to see Russia, they can still come to Russia. And we still get a few foreigners coming to Yakutsk, but we primarily get Russian business people, so people traveling within Russia coming to Yakutsk.
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback on. You said Americans can come here. Russia is open. Yeah, it certainly is. In spite of all of the sanctions that the United States and its vassals have put on Russia, it has not prohibited people from coming here, although it's much more expensive because you have to go by a circuitous route. Most people are coming from Turkey and the UAE and Qatar. And the only other thing that foreign travelers need to realize, they need to come with cash in their pockets because the credit cards won't work. But it's free and it's open. And I have to believe now, how many people are in Yakutsk?
Yakutsk is a city of about 300,000 people.
Okay, that's a pretty big place. Is there crime there? Do people have to be afraid to go to Yakutsk?
Well, there is crime in Yakutsk, and there's crime in every city, everywhere in the world that you go. But I would say we don't have a lot of crime, and we don't have a lot of violent crime. We do have the occasional fight that breaks out around the bars and things like that. That happens.
Some shoplifting. Some shoplifting probably, because that happens. There's a lot of poor people around, but
but I don't think we have so much of that. I mean, most of the crime that happens here is either people who are drunk, or on other things that happens, or there can be. We do have foreign guest workers in Yakutsk, and sometimes there can be some misunderstandings between locals and the foreign guest workers.
I hear you. Yeah. But I think like in most cities in Russia, in fact, I think you could almost say unequivocally across Russia, anybody coming here is going to feel safe. They are not going to feel in any danger from any kind of physical violence or threats or anything like that.
Yeah, I would say when my wife, we have a garage that isn't real close to where our apartment is. And when my wife is walking back from the garage at 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night, I don't worry at all.
Yeah. I was in Moscow, well, several times, but the first time I was there, I was doing a lot of filming. And we were out till 11, 12, 1 o'clock in the morning and going in the subways. And I made a lot of video. there were little old babushkas, grandmothers. There were kids, I say kids, I mean 12, 13, maybe 15 years old, high school, out and about. Nobody worried about it. And I've noticed this so many times in the subway. Uh, it's really incredible. Americans have a hard time understanding that. I want to plug the bed and breakfast. How can people find it?
Well, we have a website. It is at www.bravo, BRAVO hyphen hotel.ru.
Okay, bravo-hotel.ru. I'll look it up, and I'll put it on the screen here before we go, because I'd like people to know about it. And any of the Russians that are watching it, if they're looking for a place to stay, sure would be nice to have them patronize you. Now, what's your job in the business?
Yeah, my wife is the boss, I would say, of the company. She actually is the owner of the company that manages the bed and breakfast. I invested the money to build the place, so I do have a financial stake in the business. But I'm not employed by the bed and breakfast officially. That being said, I don't make any money directly. My wife makes all the money from our bed and breakfast. But I did create the website, and I'm the administrator for the website. And we also have a Telegram channel for the bed and breakfast, and I am the administrator for that. Post content on that. So,
Okay, I want to move on.
and I
You
do
mentioned,
marketing,
what's that?
and I do the market research for the.
Okay, good.
And I'm the trainer. We actually, probably more so than most of the other hotels in town, we actually train our staff,
Oh,
and I am the trainer.
wow, that's interesting. You mentioned CCI, the Center for
Yeah.
Citizen Initiative, Sharon Tennyson's organization. How are you connected with that?
Well, it's kind of funny. My mother-in-law knew Sharon Tennyson. I am not sure how long, but before I ever got to Russia, she was involved with Sharon Tennyson in some programs, professional exchange programs with the U.S. that Sharon was running at the time. I'm not sure what all of that was called, but I know that a lot of Yakutians went for professional exchanges to Russia, including my wife. Also went on such an exchange at one time. So my mother-in-law knew Sharon um, from way back, and I hadn't met Sharon, but there was an organization that was called RAP, which stood for the Russian American Pacific Partnership. That one of Sharon Tennyson's proteges, he had left CCI and started this RAP organization, and I participated in one of their meetings and was able to give a talk on Yakutsk and our bed and breakfast business that we had in Yakutsk. And Sharon Tennyson was there, and so I met her. And then later on, we hosted one of the people that Sharon Tennyson had brought over to Russia, which she was doing pretty often. I'm not sure how often they're doing it since COVID and since the conflict broke out in Ukraine. But I think they're planning to have another one pretty soon. But we hosted of her one of her what would you call them, citizen diplomats.
Citizen diplomats, right?
So, a pretty famous one, actually. You probably know her, Anne Wright.
Yeah, she is a pretty famous one. She's a very dear friend, and she's been a friend for a long time. And I knew that she had gone out there, and I was just hoping that I wouldn't have to prompt you to say, "Well, who was that?"
Yeah,
Yeah,
Anne
she
Wright
was.
came.
She was very impressed. Anyway, so the last delegation, citizen diplomacy delegation led by Sharon, was in 2019. COVID came, then massive sanctions, and just a deteriorating relationship between the United States and Russia. Americans weren't all too anxious to come here. And so right now there would be a very difficult time in recruiting people, given the fear that's been instilled in people's minds about Russia and Putin and everything else. But it's very expensive now to come here from the States, as you well know. And
it's not as expensive as people think. I just traveled to the U.S. not that long ago.
Well, I don't know what it was like for you, but the last time, and I've traveled here 4 times, and from New York, and I think the round trip ticket wasn't much more than $1,000, and it was direct from Moscow to New York City. And now people are telling me that not only because there's no Russian service to the United States, and all service direct from anywhere here except Istanbul, Turkey, and UAE and Qatar, it's taken a lot longer. And then on top of that, of course, as I mentioned, is you have to bring cash. So I think when you put those things together, I mean, I was involved a little bit in the decision, not the decision, but I provided input into the direction that CCI should go. And, you and I are both internet acquaintances with some of them. I just think that the time probably has passed for that until and when relationships can be restored. But anyway, that's another subject. I was just curious because I didn't know how you were connected with Sharon. And for your information, I traveled with her on the 2018 and 2019 delegations, the last 2. And she brought me along as a filmmaker to document those trips. And I didn't get to go to any cities because I traveled with Sharon to several cities, but I didn't get to go on my own to places like Yakutsk or Nizhny Novgorod or anywhere else. But anyway, I want to shift gears, and I want to ask you a personal question. I'm sure you have family in the United States. Do you have children? Did any of them have any problems with you moving to Russia because of it being Russia or political reasons?
Well, I do have family, and everybody, at least on how should I say this? I have 2 brothers and a sister that are in the United States, and I have 2 sons, and I have 5 grandchildren, and I have 1 great grandchild now, and they're all in the United States. So As far as I, I am estranged from my two brothers and my sister, and it didn't happen all at one time, but it did all happen since I've been in Russia. Um, I would say the reasons that we became estranged are probably different in each case, but it is what it is. Probably my one brother, he probably didn't want to talk to me anymore because I was in Russia and because the relationship with Russia had soured. So, but the other two, I can't say that was the reason. As far as my two sons, I'm still in contact with them and see them from time to time. I have to go to the U.S. to see them. My oldest son financially probably couldn't swing it, and he's just not that kind of a guy who would adventure outside of the U.S. I don't think he probably just couldn't handle it. He's pretty localized in Ohio. The other son can't come because he works in the for a defense contractor,
Well,
and he would have some issues if he were to show up in Russia. I've had one grandson who did come to Russia uh, and visit us, and he really enjoyed it, and I think would like to come again. But he's at an age where he's just starting out in life and trying to make his own way in life. So I'm not sure he's in a spot right now where he could get away. The others, I don't know. I think I've got another grandson that is thinking about coming over, and maybe we'll get him over.
yeah. Have you lost any friends because of your political views?
Of course. I mean, it's just especially since the relationship between Russia and the U.S. went south. I've lost a lot of friends over that.
Yeah. Well, I'm no stranger to that either. Um, they have three kids. The oldest is a daughter, and she's got three children. So I have three grandchildren there. Her opposition, if you want to call it that, to me coming was, you're not going to be here to hold your children, your grandchildren, and watch them grow up. She steers completely away from politics. She's never said anything about Russia or Putin, although one time she said, he's an assassin. And my typical response is, where did you get that information? Exactly. Where'd you get the facts? Where'd you get the proof? And if you got it from your mainstream media, that's not proof. So that's her. The second one was a Green Beret, 14 years Green Beret, highly skilled, very bright guy, and has had, I don't know if he still has it, top security clearance. He was an intelligence officer. And as a Green Beret, they all have to learn a second language. And they test them to see what their capabilities would be. And he got Russian. So he is, when I say he's fluent in Russian, he's fluent in conversational Russian. And he would love to come here because he's learned a lot about Russia, obviously. But like your one son, they probably wouldn't, he believes they wouldn't let him in because they know who he is. And we have a very good relationship. It's not at all strained. He thinks the problems are on the governmental level, the leadership in many of the countries. The youngest son, he doesn't speak to me at all. That middle son, the Green Beret, has two children, two grandchildren. And, I've thought, uh, boy, it would be great if when one of them gets maybe a year or two older, I would love to get him to come over here. But anyway, yeah, it's been a painful thing for a lot of us uh, who have come to Russia for a variety of reasons, uh, to have lost and been alienated from family members and friends. All right, now I want to shift gears again because
Okay.
we've been exchanging emails. You've been doing a lot of what I think is really good political, geopolitical analyses. So let's get real, Pete.
Okay.
You're a long way from Ukraine. I am living right next door. There's no bombs dropping on my head today. But as an American living in Russia and not far away, what are your thoughts? I want to ask you a couple of questions now. What's behind and what was behind this war, this conflict in Ukraine? When did it start and who's really behind it?
Well, the when it started is not such an easy thing to answer, because you could easily argue that it started immediately at the end of World War II. So, but I would say most people wouldn't say that's when it started. I would say the real conflict that's going on, if you want to put a date on it, it probably started in 2014, but you could easily argue that it started in 2008 when the what was it? There was a conference, I forget where it was now, where they decided that they were going to invite Georgia and Ukraine to become NATO members. And of course, Russia objected to that at that time, 2008, and said, that's not going to happen. And of course, NATO continued on with the idea.
All right, you're mentioning NATO.
The
By
U.S.
the
is
way,
behind. I
what's
mean,
that?
let's get real. It's been a U.S. doctrine since, like I say, right after
They,
World War II.
yeah, and I agree with you, and I've written about this often and talked about it. It actually did begin with Harry Truman, the end of World War II, and the dropping of the bomb. Ever since that time, the relationship with Soviet Union and then Russia has incrementally gone downhill. And as you, I think, started to say at the very end, it's really the stated foreign policy doctrine, public, of the United States to break up and to inflict a great deal of damage on the Russian Federation. That's public, and there's no need to fudge with that. So, as you said, let's get real, and it's the United States that's behind this. I think it's very clear today. How do you read the handwriting on the wall, Pete? And I'm going to mention a couple of things. Number one, according to most American credible analysts, from Scott Ritter to Douglas McGregor to Andrei Martyanov to Pepe Escobar, I mean, the list of credible people is not that long, but I've mentioned five of the most, I think, significant, are claiming that Ukraine has lost the war. They've lost maybe as many as 1 million men and women, either killed in action or permanently wounded and will never return to the fight. Zelensky has been crying for more money, and he's been traveling here and there and saying that we can win this thing if you just give us more money. Well, in the United States, the Republicans in Congress have held up $60 billion to go to Ukraine, which is not going to change anything. And I'd like your comments on that. And the third thing is there's a presidential election going on in the United States that is definitely distracting, I think, Biden and the people around him. And they seem to be not so anxious to escalate things. Your comments on those three things and anything else you want to talk about in terms of what's going on politically behind this?
Yeah, well, the world has definitely gotten quite complicated here in the last few months, because not only do we have the conflict in Ukraine, but we also have a conflict in Palestine that in many ways I think is connected to the conflict in Ukraine as well. And yeah, Joe Biden would like to get reelected. And I think originally he thought he wanted to be elected as a war president. And his idea, you know, when the special military operation began 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, that he was going to triumph and be the great savior of the world. Well, it's not worked out that way. We all remember his comment about, if Russia goes into Ukraine, they're going to put such sanctions on Russia that the ruble will be rubble. Remember that comment?
Yeah, I sure do. And the ruble is pretty strong today, much stronger than it has been.
And the economy is strong. And actually the economy in Russia is growing, which I don't think many of the EU countries can say that their economies are growing right now. And
oh gosh,
I think the U.S. claims that they're growing, but I think the statistics have been manipulated, and the real economy in the U.S. is probably not growing at all.
Yeah, and I think more and more people are beginning to realize that, because they're feeling it at the gas pump, they're feeling it at the grocery store, they're feeling it, everywhere. And I've been talking to a number of Americans who was just telling you, and these are not wealthy people. Some of them have done okay in life, but they're saying it's getting harder for everybody. And that's another factor that I think is playing into this. Do you think that without American support directly for Ukraine and to the EU and NATO, do you think that this effort to take down Russia, balkanize it, and get rid of Putin, do you think it's sustainable, or do you think it's basically just about run its course?
Well, I don't think it matters if the U.S. sends money, sends weapons, or whatever. I think Russia had thought very carefully about what they were doing, had planned for it. They didn't just decide to go to war 2 years ago. No, this has been something that has been planned for. I think Vladimir Putin understood that it was going to happen, that, he didn't want it to happen. And I think he did a lot of things to try to prevent it from happening. But I think he was pretty convinced that there wasn't going to be any way to stop it from happening. So he planned for it, and he built up the Russian military so that they were prepared, and they put in all of the mechanisms to make sure that the economy was protected. And he developed good partnerships with countries like China and the global south and all sorts of places. Most of the population in the world, India. So he was pretty confident that Russia could sustain all of the sanctions that were going to be put on Russia and come through it. And the planning that was done has paid off. And it's clear to me that well, Ukraine has lost, I think, 4 armies already. The NATO countries are out of weapons. There's a reason that Ukraine can't have any more Patriot missiles. There's a reason why they can't get any more Leopard tanks. There's a reason why they, aren't getting all of the things they would like to have. It's because the NATO is out of them. They don't have them to send.
Yeah. And a couple of things I want to follow up on. You mentioned just in passing that you thought the war in Ukraine and the genocide that's being conducted now in Palestine are connected. Absolutely, they are connected. It's the United States behind both of those. It's all about oil. It's all about stealing resources and ensuring. I mean, United States has no security reasons to be in the Middle East, to be in NATO, to be in Ukraine. None at all. It's all about manifest destiny. I mean, that's since way back, to destroy people and to take their land and take their resources. So I absolutely agree with you that the two are connected. And I still wonder whether or not it's sustainable, given the economic crisis in the United States, the political chaos, the deep-seated anger and animosity between people, blue and red, Democrat, Republican, conservative, liberal. They're divided over so many issues. And then you look at what America's got, talk about being overextended, 800 bases in some 90 countries around the world that are costing a small fortune. And so, in the rest of the world, as you're mentioning now, we're looking at that. They're basically behind the BRICS movement, Russia, China, and it's expanding. This movement is expanding. The move to de-dollarize. Russia and China now are trading, and many other countries are trading in their own currencies. I just read the other day, Pete, that now on the Moscow Stock Exchange, I guess it's Moscow Stock Exchange, they're no longer trading in dollars, they're trading in the yuan. So when you look at all of these things we've been talking about, what do you see as the future for the United States and for the Western governments and economies?
Well, it's pretty clear to me that the United States is not going to be the hegemon that it believed it deserves to be, and probably was for the last 20 years, maybe. They could get away with it for 20 years, but it's run its course. They can't sustain it. The economy in the United States can't sustain this kind of military spending all over the world. Americans don't even know how many conflicts the United States is involved with.
Yeah,
I think
I'm
it's
with you
about
on that. Go ahead.
I think it's about 30.
Yeah.
I
And
haven't counted lately, and there's some that are hotter than others.
yeah, and there's covert and overt operations of the United States, which are two sides of the same coin. Yeah, American people really don't have any idea. And I've
I don't
often,
think they even want to know. That's what that's what upsets me more than anything. I don't
yeah,
think most Americans want to know.
yeah, you could be right. And right now, they're all caught up in the future election and the choice between, again, what they claim is the lesser of two evils. Um, I think we're in for a really rocky time worldwide because of what will happen in November in the United States. No matter which one is elected, I think there is going to be a conflict. I think there's going to be the potential for violence is very high. Uh, Before we go, I want to put your website up. I brought it up here. Uh, Here it is for people to see. Bed and Breakfast Bravo. Looks like a really lovely place. Uh, Geez, if I ever get out to Yakutsk, I have to admit though, Pete, it's not that high on the bucket list. I still haven't been to Volgograd, Stalingrad, and that is right now like maybe number two. And then there's some commitments that I've made where I have to go to Moscow for the May 9th military parade. Um, but if I can ever get out there, I would love to meet you in person, sit down. I don't know if you drink any Russian beverages. Um, I'm partial to Russian wines, Crimean wines anyway, and I've been known to enjoy some vodka from time to time. But I'm really happy to have finally connected with you, Pete. And I think I'd like to have you on again. And as things politically uh, continue to escalate at a rapid pace, not only well here in Russia in terms of the Ukraine, but in terms of where things are going in the Middle East, I think it's on the verge of exploding. Uh, I don't see a lot of hope there. And then, as you mentioned, you've got China um, and the whole Taiwan issue, not to mention these other some 30 places where the United States is involved. That, as you mentioned earlier, uh, the world is in a very difficult place right now, and it concerns me. So uh, I hope
The
that you'll come
concern
back.
is that we end up in a nuclear conflict, and then humanity gets wiped out.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw my film 30 Seconds to Midnight, but I've mentioned this repeatedly because it keeps coming up. Um, in 2017, I finished this film. That's why I came to Russia the first time in 2016. I didn't believe anything that the government was telling me anymore. And to finish the film, which uh, was describing the existential threats to nuclear annihilation, and I had to come here to find out for myself what Russia and Russian people were like. And nobody here was bellicose. Nobody here wanted war, much less wanted a nuclear war. And so I finished the film. And at the end of the film, I basically said, and I wouldn't call them neocons today, but I said, if the neocons in Washington or whoever it is pulling the strings realize they've lost this epic battle for the future order and control of the world, take us all down with us in a nuclear Armageddon. Uh, and I think that's exactly where we are today. Uh, if not by some deliberate action of a crazed Dr. Strangelove, then by accident. And there's been so many close calls over the years. And now with all of these tensions and military adventures going on everywhere, I think the possibility of a mistake is very, very high. Pete, thanks so much. Has the snow melted yet out there in Yakutsk?
No, it has not. In fact, we just had new snow 2 days ago, I believe, and we're expecting to get more. Usually, we have some of our heaviest snows uh, actually coming up here at the end of April and May. Here in
So,
Yakutsk, we have an interesting phenomenon because we get very cold winters here. It every winter we get down to minus 50 centigrade, even colder sometimes. We've been to minus 60.
somebody told me once that don't even try to convert that to Fahrenheit. It's all the same.
Well, at minus 40, it is the same. And then at minus 50, it's like you can figure minus 60 Fahrenheit and so on. But it's cold. And we're on the River Lena. And until the ice breaks on the River Lena, it will stay cold here in the city of Yakutsk. But the ice will break sometime in May. And once the ice breaks, it's happens every year. The ice breaks, and then there's an ice flow that sweeps all the ice away. And within about 1 week, 7 days to 10 days, we go from freezing temperatures to plus 30
Whoa.
centigrade.
That's plus 30 centigrade.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Well, I have to tell you, it's pretty warm here in Crimea. The temperatures jumped just this past week. It's 70, 20 plus centigrade and 70 something Fahrenheit. And it's so warm. I'm sitting on a balcony that behind me you can see a fan going because the sun is beating down on these windows along this balcony. And it's now getting really hot inside. Pete, thanks so much. Good luck to you up there. We'll look forward to seeing you again.
Okay. Well, it's been my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me on your show.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you.